Hello, everyone. We're just going to be a minute, just waiting for everybody to join the showcase. Thank you.
You can tell it's 12:30 here where I am.
Okay, I think we can get started.
Because of the chime, yeah.
Yeah.
So all to you, Carmen.
I should start now?
Sure.
Okay. Are there people in attendance?
Oh, yes. We have
Good.
35 right now.
Fantastic. Hi, I'm Carmen Sid. I'm a forest and wetland ecologist, and I'm also the Dean of Arts and Sciences at Eastern Connecticut State University. You've been hearing about the Ecological Society of America four-dimensional ecology education curricular framework Thursday, Friday, and today. And today we will be continuing discussing this in this session in a short overview of how the 4DEE curriculum can be used to transform programs. And three types of programs: a course, a whole program, and a summer research experience. We have, as our panelists, besides myself, we have Kim Bjorgo-Thorne, who will be talking about program redesign, and she comes from West Virginia Wesleyan College. And then we have Alan Berkowitz, who's the head of education at the Cary Institute of Ecosystem Studies in Millbrook, New York. And he'll be talking about the summer research experience design and the assessment of the 4DE in designing that experience. So let me just start doing a short overview of how do we bring the 4 dimensions into the majors and non-major courses for undergraduates. Okay. You've seen this logo before. I'm just putting it back into your head. That's our website, the Ecological Society of America. This curriculum was endorsed by the Society in 2018, and we have 4 dimensions. Normally, we teach about the ecology concepts. We may integrate a lot of hands-on learning types of practices. We tend to leave out the human environment interactions into each of these topics that we teach. And sometimes we don't take these concepts and put them into the larger scale of biological themes, such as evolution, structure and function, pathways, and so on. So we're trying to get everyone to move into that direction at the society. I'm going just to focus on how do you do course transformation? What do you do first? Well, as I've said, if you're dealing primarily with your basic topics and the practices, make sure you prioritize integrating the human dimension into the discussion of each of these topics, and continue infusing hands-on learning techniques, and also make sure that you have some understanding of where your students are in terms of their exposure to field and environmental experiences, so that you can proceed. And that helps you if you integrate the human dimension. It is very helpful in getting them to understand this integration of dimensions, and keep thinking about where ecology fits into the biology scheme of things. Mostly we cover, these are the basic concepts, either the ecology practices. You've heard about this before. Human environment interactions. It's not just the human impact on the environment, it's how humans depend on the environment, and the ethical dimensions. There are many different components involved. The cross-cutting themes: spatial and temporal scale, systems thinking, pathways, structure, and function. So what are the 5 easy steps to follow to transform your course? First, for each lesson, you need to know what concept you're focusing on, and your students need to know it too. That's the important part. We want to be intentional about getting students to see that you're not just talking, you're actually trying to get them to move in a certain direction of interdimensional components. So the practices for yourself, what practices are you featuring? Where is the human dimension coming into your discussion in lecture or lab? And how are your students aware, and how are you making them aware that this fits into the larger scheme of biological themes? You have to have questions about this integration of dimensions in your exams, in your quizzes, and very importantly in your lab reports, or have them address it in their own presentations about it. For the majors, again, increased human dimension integration. Intentionally let the students know the importance of integrating these dimensions. You are training today's environmental workforce. For the non-majors, we always seem to focus more on the human-environment interactions, but we need to put those in the context of the major problems we have today that are environmentally focused: climate change, biodiversity, resources, systems. Integration is the key to 4DEE. Check out our website. And again, my name is Carmen Sid. Come back at 3:45 p.m. where we're going to do in-depth discussion and help you with workshops on the categories of summer research design and evaluation, as well as program redesign and curriculum redesign. Make students aware that multidimensional thinking is their key to success. Showcase current and global environmental issues, and do some pre-assessment of where your students are at, and then assessment after your teaching of where they've come in integrating these dimensions. Thank you. And now we can go on to Kim Bjorgo-Thorne. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Yep, I'm gonna grab this one. So again, my name is Kim Bjorgo-Thorne, and I'm at West Virginia Wesleyan College, which is a primarily undergraduate institution in a rural part of West Virginia. My background in ecology is a little bit different than, of course, my students' background. Most of my students here at Wesleyan are first-generation college students. And while we are a predominantly rural state, not all of these students have had much of an appreciation for nature instilled in them during their earlier education from grade school K to 12. So one of the things that we wanted to do as a program was redesign our entire major around the idea of having students focus on ecology and how ecosystem ecology is essentially the structure, even for all understanding all of life. We kind of came at it from the point of view of the article that was in Science that said that medical students, pre-med students, needed to have some experience with ecological systems in order to be really good medical professionals. And our biology program here actually does cater to mostly pre-medicine students, and that could be any of the allied health fields: dental, optometry, veterinary, etc. So we really wanted to make sure that we were giving our students an opportunity to experience ecology. So what we did was took the entire 4DEE framework and restructured our entire major with ecology as the center, and with a course offering for tropical studies as a transitional or as a applied moment where students could go to the Peruvian Amazon and experience rainforest ecology and kind of get some background and some experience with the cultural side of conservation and understanding the role of humans in their environment. So we'll be talking more about that at 3:45 today, and I hope you will join us then. Alan?
Guess I gotta unmute. I gotta share my screen. Okay. So we all set? So I'm gonna talk with you today, this morning, or I guess it's this afternoon, a little bit about how do you bring or use 4DEE to transform research experience programs such as RU programs. And I want to acknowledge Cary O'Connell, Kelly Hoke, Mike Giamarello, and a bunch of folks involved in the Undergraduate Field Experience Research Network. So this is my first time trying to combine two kind of really exciting and powerful frameworks into one kind of talk and workshop this afternoon. So we'll see how it goes. So the UFERN is a group of it's a research coordination network, undergraduate biology education grant from NSF that Cary's the PI on. This is a bunch of us about a year ago at Andrews Experimental Forest that have come up with a framework for how to think about undergraduate field experience programs. And so this is not exactly RU programs, but there's so much overlap that I thought that this framework would be really useful to kind of put into context. How do you bring something like 4DEE into an intensive research experience type program, which is what UFERN addresses. So this is the framework that group came up with. And I think it's a useful, it's like we call it a logic model. And I think but I think it's a really powerful kind of fairly simple, this is a simpler version. So the idea is if we care about what actually happens to students as a result of participating in our programs, well, that's really a function of their experience. And their experience turns out to be kind of a function of what we have them do, kind of how we design the program. So these factors of program design and things about the students. So Carmen and Kim both actually in their talking, they also emphasize key things about their students that they have to think about in order to understand and design for these actual outcomes. And it all kind of starts with, well, what do we want them to get out of it? And so, and Carmen and both of them also kind of acknowledged how important that is. So you hopefully, and these are the framework now fleshed out. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about these, but just to make you aware that a lot of thought has gone into, well, what is it about students that you need to know? And so what do they already know? Why are they participating? What are their interests and identity? What's their worldview? Those are kind of the student factors. And then on design, there's things like, where is the program? How long? How are you bringing them into the program? What kind of social interactions? Choice and power is kind of an interesting feature to think about. Where does the power lie in kind of controlling the experience? So this is kind of, we think that this is a really useful framework to think about designing these kinds of programs. And so if we're thinking about, well, what does 4DEE have to do with this? Well, 4DEE kind of defines at least two dimensions of the major outcomes that we want to have from these programs. We want students to learn things, so there's kind of a cognitive outcomes, and we want students to be able to do things. We want them to have skills and practices. So we think that this is kind of a good place to kind of combine these two frameworks. This is more of an overall program design, and then this is kind of situating 4DEE into this. So 4DEE comes from, in a lot of places, a personal anchoring of 4DE that I'll share with you is a model for environmental citizenship that Mary Ford, who's now at National Geographic, Carol Brewer, who many of you might know, who went on to lead the Vision and Change process. We came up with this framework, and it kind of situates environmental science literacy in kind of a social science literacy, environmental science literacy, cognitive set of understandings and abilities with some affective or more feeling dimensions, including an ethics literacy and awareness and self-efficacy, and this dynamic kind of back and forth between your knowledge and your feelings and what you actually do. And it's not just we learn these things in order to do things, but the arrows come out from the middle. We develop knowledge, we develop feelings based on what we do. So that was a framework that kind of precedes 4DEE. So here's 4DEE, and you see that it's kind of well positioned to address this ecological science literacy circle in our model. And it's even nicely positioned to address the connections to the human dimension, the inclusion of practical skills, et cetera. So now, what does 4DEE have to do with these undergraduate research or these intensive programs? So here's 4DE kind of spelled out in all its glory. These are the 21 elements that are included. And I think it's helpful to think about what are our goals for these research experience programs? What do we want students to get out of a summer research experience? And what does that have to do with 4DE? Well, so for instance, with our, so I'm going to talk about this in terms of two programs that I've been involved in, the Cary RU program, the theme of which is translational ecology, and the Urban Water Innovation Network undergraduate research program, the theme of which is transdisciplinary science. So, so these two programs, I guess I have 38 years worth of experience with these programs, all told. So, so maybe I have a little bit of wisdom, maybe. So in any event, one of the main things that characterizes any of our research experience programs is we have students do research projects. So I would suggest that the research project is like this amazing vehicle for 4DEE learning, especially if we pick projects that involve the human dimension. So for instance, our RU program this past summer, we had 12 students. I would say 10 of the students' projects were totally involved a human dimension, and only 1 or 2 of them were really theoretical ecology that didn't explicitly bring in a human dimension. But then interestingly, with a research experience program, unless you're going to have all of them work on ecosystems, you might end up with a range of outcomes in terms of what core concepts they learn, right? And if you really want them to learn a whole bunch of ecology concepts, these research experience programs are a depth, not breadth learning experience. So you have to recognize that. I would also say that they're a great way of championing a number of practices. So the students are designing and critiquing studies, they're dealing with data, many of them are doing field study, and then many of them are actually also doing natural history and some of these other practices. And if they're writing a paper or giving a presentation that's any good, it's going to have cross-cutting themes. None of us are going to mentor students to write a paper about any of these topics and not have the students talk about the big themes that connect to their research. And so these research projects are really great, I think, for facilitating and organizing four-dimensional learning, especially if you include the human dimension. Even if your projects don't involve the human dimension, we also tend to provide enrichment during these research experience programs in the form of other activities that the students do. Very few research experience programs involve strictly a research project. So we have workshops, we have other assignments. So for instance, in our two programs, we address collaboration and communication on the practices side. We have an ethics literacy component, and we also, we still kind of emphasizing the kind of this ecology stuff at the bottom of our diagram. So to put that together into this, back into the UFERN framework, and then I'll wrap up, and I don't know why those two are down there. So we've had to kind of change our intended outcomes. So we have these transdisciplinary and or translational ecology outcomes that we think facilitate four-dimensional learning. We have explicit four-dimensional kind of cognitive goals. That's the number one. We have skills both in doing research, but also collaboration and these translational or transdisciplinary practices. And we also want the students to go away feeling like, I can do this. I can use 4DEE. I can use translational or transdisciplinary ecology. So then in terms of our recruitment and selection, we try to pick students that are interested in that, right? And so we've always picked students that can benefit the most from the program, diverse students, but now we're looking for students who are really kind of interested in the vehicles for transdisciplinary or 4DEE learning. But we have to recognize that students might, over here, students might not be sure that 4DEE is actually helpful in their career. A lot of our students want a publication. They're these very aggressive, very ambitious students. They want a publication. Oh, is 4DE going to help me? Is translational ecology going to help me? So that's kind of something we have to keep in mind. They, in their applications, and we select for this, tell us they really are interested in translational ecology. And they're really interested in the human dimension. It's very rare we get an application from a student who doesn't mention the human dimension in their reason for wanting to pursue ecology. So that's kind of a thing for us to remember about our students. And then over on the design factors, the timing and setting are kind of set. But again, we pick 4D research projects to facilitate 4-dimensional learning. We also give them, for some of the practices, we give them multiple social interactions that support their development of these practices. And we give them a lot of control over the research project, but also over the enrichment thing. So they do a case study where they decide what the outcome of the case study is, completely 4-dimensional in the shape of this case study. And same thing with the enrichment activities. So Carmen kept saying that I emphasize assessment. And actually, I think assessment is one of our biggest challenges. We have these authentic products from the students, right? And these are some of the products under 0. They produce a paper, they produce a statement, they have a product from their case study, they do something for education, something for communication, but we don't have great tools for giving them feedback on how this is really judged and expressive of 4-dimensional learning. So that's something that we feel like is a frontier. And I'm going to stop there. Thank you. And I'll stop sharing. Stop sharing. Okay.
So now we're waiting for your questions, comments.
Sorry.
Carmen, you have a couple of questions in the Q&A area.
Okay. There was a question about Alan's program design.
Yeah, so I think that these intensive RU type programs have several things built in that allow for and kind of allow for addressing diverse student interests. We have one-on-one mentoring, we have small groups, we can do a fair amount of pre-assessment and really kind of know where students are coming from. So I think that, I think that's kind of a sweet spot in responsive, at least the potential for responsiveness. But even that being said, it's still an ongoing challenge because these research experiences are so multidimensional. So and in the ideal, the student has lots of skills and experience and knowledge to bring to bear, and to deal with the diversity of the reality that you get is often challenging. Students need help with writing. A lot of students need help realizing they need help with writing. And so even right there, just that one dimension, and how do you deal with the diversity? It's a challenge, and I appreciate that.
I can add a little bit to that as well, Alan. In our program, again, the idea of trying to reach diverse students is paramount. And you have the classroom setting, right, where you're trying to convey the concepts of ecology or microbiology or whatever. But we've integrated we call it experiential learning, or you could call it an internship requirement. So the students have to do some sort of one-on-one research with a agency, with a consulting company, lots of different, any type of ecological related jobs, anything you could possibly think of. And yes, they have the opportunity to work with pre-med if that's what their interest is. but we have a lot more opportunity for field or ecology or outdoors related work than we do for pre-medicine. And as long as the students are getting those one-on-one experiences, I think it really helps address where the student themselves is coming from.
And from my point of view, the taking into account where the students are coming from requires a little assessment at the start of a class, where it would be a question of when did your first experience in going outside and observing nature. And you may get a few answers to that, and you may get nobody having had that experience. If you know that you have a lot of students who are interested in pre-med type of careers, then you can go into the pandemic and say, this is an example of why we need to understand ecology, since the spread of diseases is an ecological phenomenon, and how that's affected by the human dimension and so on. And you keep going from there. I think it's good to assess where your students are. Your students may have been exposed to the environment in a particular place, a park, with their parents, with a family member, with a teacher. And so anything they've had, any experience they've had outside, you can take that experience and build up on it. And often what it does help is to use online resources. So you're giving them an assignment. Oh, you've got that experience already. Look up more information about the history of that place and what environmental components are associated with that. I live, as you can see in my screen, I live right in front of the Village Green in Connecticut, the oldest town, which is started in 1634. And the trees are over 200 years old, a lot of the trees on the green. And students get a lot of information about all kinds of signs around the place about this being a site where the Revolutionary War people had, their encampments, and where Washington slept here and so on. But they don't get any discussion from their public school classes about these trees, which, we actually grew the biggest elm in all of America here on this green. And it was planted in 1750s and it was cut down in the late 1950s because of Dutch elm disease. So there are all these little things that you can connect to a place that everybody's aware of, or that your students are connected to, but they've never heard about the environmental aspects of it.
So I'm afraid I think we're almost out of time here. Carmen, do you want to answer the one question? I think you kind of broached on it, or anybody, just maybe closing remarks, and then we'll have to go on to the next session.
Someone else? I did connect to the diversity, yeah.
Well, so the comment is about how, there's only 3 weeks total out of a year for ecology. Is there any?
I think I encourage you to try to cram everything into the 3 weeks and err towards the depth side. So if the students can come to understand one really important phenomena from all the 4 dimensions, let's say, and a phenomena that might be kind of a somewhat big, interesting, important, that might be better than trying to go into depth in too many dimensions. So that would be my one advice.
Kim, you have a last comment?
I was responding to Laura's question. I typed that my response out for that. Thanks, Laura. Yeah, I think that there's a lot of great places we can go with 4DEE and providing a truly multidimensional workforce for when these students graduate that makes them eminently employable. And that's regardless if it's a 2-year or 4-year institution. I look forward to seeing more questions at our session at 3:45.
Thank you.
So thank you very much, everybody. And sorry I have to say this, but it's time to move on to the next event, which is the Education Share Fair happening right now. So look for the Zoom links in the program schedule. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.